Hello, I'm Richard Syrett. Welcome to The Conspiracy Show. Pterosaurs, or pterodactyls, were ferocious carnivorous flying lizards that dominated the skies from the late Triassic to the end of the Cretaceous period. It's generally agreed they've been extinct for 65 million years. The smallest was about the size of a sparrow, while the largest had a tip-to-tip wingspan that reached up to 40 feet, which is equivalent to that of your average jet fighter. So, to summarize, a flying lizard about the size of an airplane. Fine. But what if I were to tell you that these things might still be alive, flying around in very remote places around the globe, occasionally attacking people? That's the subject of this episode of The Conspiracy Show. We're about to meet several cryptozoologists who believe pterosaurs, or pterodactyls, did not all die off 65 million years ago, and that there have been numerous credible sightings of these creatures in places like Papua New Guinea, where they're referred to by the local aboriginals as ropen. Of course, our skeptic will check in to warn us not to get duped by such myths, and that the primary proponents of the living dinosaur theory tend to be charlatans or young Earth creationists, intent on somehow disproving evolution by finding creatures thought to have been long extinct. Me? I just want the truth, and I'll follow it wherever it leads. It is time to redefine reality.
Pterodactyl is a complex term. Usually people refer to that, and layman's refer to it, they mean pterosaur. Sometimes they say pterodactyl. Americans sometimes will say a prehistoric bird or a dinosaur bird. When eyewitnesses see a flying creature, sometimes they don't get a good view of the head. When they do, one of the things that clues them onto this is something unusual is that it has a particular kind of appendage at the back of the head. It's like a horn, somewhat pointed, somewhat long and thin. And they also see an absence of feathers. The wingspan estimates from the 98 sightings that I analyzed in 2011 are incredible. They're a very even ratio, very even spread from 3 or 4 feet all the way up to 35 feet. That even spread is what clues me into that this is no result of a hoax or hoaxes on the overall data. Not meaning that there are no hoaxes, but there could not have been hoaxes that influenced those 98 sightings in general.
I've been to 2 very public expeditions to Papua New Guinea. Beyond those 2 expeditions, because we're doing research, we don't want people to have it exposed and the public get in there and really create havoc among the natives. We have a very delicate relationship with the landowner. So right now we're not confirming or denying we're doing research in Papua New Guinea right now. The natives say that it eats a variety of foods, shellfish, clams, fish, but the most notorious food it has when it can get it are dead bodies. I guess this thing is a scavenger as well. If there's not sufficient time for the body to decompose, they'll actually dig them up out of the ground if the grave isn't protected or covered with cement. Yes, we do have some accounts of people being attacked by these creatures. I know of several instances where people have died. A man would be attacked and carried up in the air and dropped. Then the creature would come back, take the body. Papua New Guinea has 800 languages and dialects, even more. And so maybe there's, when you come right down to it, hundreds of names for the same creature. On one island in Papua New Guinea, on Umboy Island, they do call it ropen on the northern half of the island. The southern half of the island, they actually call it duos, and duos means shooting star. There were actually 2 expeditions in 2004 to Umboy Island, and we were able to interview many eyewitnesses on Umboy Island, including near Gumlagan and Opai, and 3 critical, key sighting eyewitnesses that were in a little village up near the actual sighting location of Lake Pung. Gideon Coro and 2 of his friends, they went up to Lake Pung, the first time for Gideon to ever be there, and they saw something flying over the lake. They knew the traditions. It was a ropen. All 3 of the ones that I interviewed, it was a ropen. They are positive about what they call it. It flew over the lake fairly close to the surface, and it scared them so badly that they ran home, and
One of the 3 eyewitnesses I interviewed was still terrified 10 years later just to talk about the experience. Gideon says it had a tail 7 meters long, and he said that after looking at the ground, trying to make an estimate, and looked at me without blinking and said, 7 meters, 23 feet.
And one individual, his name is Jim Bloom, who is a missionary pilot, who has flown over that territory countless times delivering supplies to villages and mission stations, has actually observed these creatures. The Ropen has been known for many, many years, for many generations, I should say, to the local tribespeople on Amboy Island, New Britain, and many other locations there. There's 2 names for them. There's the Ropen, which means night flyer, and the Duos, which means demon flyer. And one individual, his name is Jim Bloom, who is a missionary pilot, who has flown over that territory countless times delivering supplies to villages and mission stations, has actually observed these creatures. Some of them are very small, wingspan of about 3 feet, and they sometimes attack fishermen. Others are gigantic pterosaurs with the long appendage behind the head, an enormous beak filled with teeth, and they're particularly dangerous because there have been reports of children being snatched by these creatures, and even adults being attacked and killed by these monsters.
Well, we don't have a lot of faith in the accuracy of these claims, as you can imagine. The eyewitness accounts are not very reliable. I've seen some films trying to identify certain creatures in the Congo and in other places, and they're not very convincing. A lot of times you look up and you really don't know what you're looking at. It could be a bird, it could be anything, it could be a flying squirrel. I wouldn't even venture to say what they're looking at, but we have so many cases where people see things and they misidentify them. That seems to me to be the most logical explanation right off the bat.
Fossil records, for example, of pterosaurs, and after 60 million years, they don't find any more. Doesn't that suggest that they did, in fact, become extinct 60 million years ago?
Well, if you take the position that they existed 60 million years ago, most of our associates do not at all, that they did not exist that long ago. We do not have fossil records in all species. Everybody simply agrees with that. There may be many species that we do not have fossil records for. And it's very likely that maybe one of them, maybe one pterosaur or 2, has survived.
I don't believe they were around millions of years ago, because I don't believe there were millions of years ago. Everything fits quite well with a simple interpretation of thousands of years. It fits well with the facts. Millions versus thousands of years, when you place them side by side in a scientific model, you have a whole lot less holes in the model of thousands of years compared to the millions of years.
What is a creation scientist?
Basically, a scientist who accepts true science, that is empirical science, but believes that everything that we know of, the origins and life, came about by an act of divine creation rather than the process of evolution. I mean, we believe the Earth is much younger. Now, there's 2 camps of creationists here. There are young Earth creationists, that's myself. We believe the Earth is thousands and not millions of years old. And the old Earth creationists, who believe in the evolutionary time scale and believe that the books of Genesis represent millions of years rather than actual days.
Well, creation science, of course, is not science at all. The massive, overwhelming majority of the scientific community worldwide says that the world's history is measured in billions of years, not in thousands of years, and that there was mass extinctions that got rid of the dinosaurs at various other times in history.
The coelacanth fish was buried only in the dinosaur layers, not above. And then they started catching them in the 1930s. Evolutionists say, oh, it's an anomaly. I say, no, it's not an anomaly. I got a list of 63 right here, and I'm sure there's more.
I don't think you can extrapolate a fish that we once thought was extinct and then that we have found. 0% of the human population lives in the ocean. That we're finding new fish and new things in the ocean now should not be a surprise to people.
I guess the big question would be, how have they survived at all?
They're nocturnal. They're rather reclusive. There are not many of them. They're at the top of their food chains. The creature has a particular food supply in the reefs, and it will go out at nighttime, and it will go to the reefs and find food. So they have their niches, if you will, and their ways of living.
I was minding my own business, laying down in a grassy field, doing research, looking straight up, and all of a sudden, I see a shooting star. I was minding my own business, laying down in a grassy field, doing research, looking straight up, and all of a sudden, I see a shooting star. Well, this shooting star, as it completely dimmed out and was completely dark, just suddenly turned into the black figure of a flying creature with vigorously flapping wings. The wings were flapping so vigorously, it was like a hummingbird. So you see the typical looking shooting star. It dims out. When it's completely black, here moving at the same rate in the exact same location is suddenly a black figure of a flying creature.
They are nocturnal, they fly at night, and they exhibit a bright luminescent glow as they fly. In fact, in the book of Isaiah, in the Bible, the Old Testament, it talks about the fiery flying dragon, or something that would exhibit a bright, fiery glow as it flew.
I believe that this bioluminescence that we see is related to ancient accounts of glowing dragons and fire-breathing dragons. They'll cause a light to attract insects in warmer weather, and as the insects are attracted to that area, the bats will come there. As the pterosaurs or ropens, as they're separated and they're some distance away, the bats will congregate because there's no longer a threat. Then the two creatures come back and feed on the big brown bat.
They give off an interesting light. Are you familiar with the bioluminescence?
Yes, the bioluminescence theory is caused by a bacteria and we have, of course, many aquatic creatures that seem to be appointed with the bioluminescence. So it's certainly possible and it's conceivable that this is typical of this type of a dinosaur. Perhaps even back 65 million years ago, the pterosaurs had bioluminescence. That would not be part of the fossil record.
Could then this bioluminescence be connected to the legends of fire-breathing dragons?
Well, that is a very interesting idea. And while the fire wouldn't be coming out of their mouths, the idea that they have this bioluminescence could be, observers might extrapolate and say they're now breathing fire, when it's just that they have an internal or inherent bioluminescence. And that's a very good point.
Herodotus, probably been called the father of history, as a matter of fact, wrote many accounts of dragon-like creatures, and he actually wrote of an account of flying dragons, or flying snakes, or serpents, as he called them.
I think throughout history, people have mistaken things they've seen or retold other people's stories about seeing all kinds of animals. The fact that people have seen something in the water or in the air that they couldn't identify and told a story about that is not a new phenomenon. And you can comb through history and literature and find references to mythical beasts, which may or may not be based in some actual sighting, and say, that these things have been around.
And not only Herodotus, Strabo, Aristotle, Josephus, all describe fiery flying serpents. And that fits a pterosaur pretty well. Pterosaur meaning flying reptile. They evidently bite you, and by the way, it's the same word for the creatures that bit the children of Israel in the wilderness and killed a bunch of them. As the children of Israel came out of Egypt and went through the wilderness, they were bit by fiery serpents, it says. Isaiah mentions also that these same seraphs flew. Herodotus actually used the word valiant. These creatures were valiant. They go into battle and they just take you on.
Show me a body. I would love to see a body. I would even love to see a piece of a body. Show me some DNA that doesn't match any other creature on Earth. Show me a clear video of something instead of some fuzzy thing or way distant that may or may not be this thing. Really, the evidence we've seen so far is really bad and fuzzy, and it's based on a lot of conjecture. So, you know, for those of us in the skeptical community to buy into any of this stuff, let's, you know, crate one of these things up and ship it to a museum somewhere and have a look at it.
Well, we know that they exist. The dead, we believe that they probably die in their caves. They roost in caves, a bit like bats do, but very high up in the mountainous regions, very difficult to get to. However, a couple of television production companies, you know, that put out shows like Monster Quest, they have gone to Papua New Guinea and they have actually filmed these bright flying objects zooming around at night on the hills and down by the coastline. So they at least have seen the creatures flying around as they're exhibiting this incredible, this bright luminescence. So, and these are not meteorites, they're not aircraft or anything like that. These are actually animate objects. So surely it's only a matter of time before we get them. But the locals say these creatures are very difficult to kill. But sooner or later, I hope one of them will turn up.
The trail, they heard something thrashing through the bush. It turned out to be just a wild pig, but something else was startled. At that time, they saw something at the far end of the clearing being only about 100 feet in diameter.
What do you think it would be like to encounter one of these magnificent creatures if it was flying overhead or you actually saw it standing there?
Well, I would hope that I would get out my camcorder and start recording it. But you never know what you're going to do in such a circumstance. I might be the first to run away, but it would be wonderful to capture this on, first of all, on camera, and if we could capture one alive and study it.
If it required shooting one of these creatures in order to prove conclusively that they exist, would you be in support of that?
I do not support killing creatures to prove that they exist. It's not a good, productive way to go about that. What we need most is clear thinking. Not everybody embraces a live pterodactyl, but some of those who object to the idea have a problem with clear thinking. We need to be open to human experience. Human experience is the key. He was with his army buddy. They had stopped to look at some ants that were unusually large, and as the native guide went up the trail, they heard something thrashing through the bush. It turned out to be just a wild pig, but something else was startled. At that time, they saw something at the far end of the clearing being only about 100 feet in diameter. Something started running and flapping its wings and took off and flew over the jungle canopy so that it was out of sight for a moment. But then it circled back and came back. They saw a perfect side view, he describes. Incredible sighting. In the middle of the day, nothing obscuring their view. And he noticed the head crest at the back, and after it flew out of view the second time, it didn't return. And that's when they realized they had a military camera.
I think the likelihood that one of these larger creatures exists is very remote. Is it a fun idea to think about and maybe go out chasing these things? In some way, I don't blame these people for going out and hunting these things. It makes for great fireside stories. Do I think they're going to find one of them? No.
I'm not out to convince right now. I'm getting evidence so I can. That's our ultimate goal, is not even to prove, is just to help people to consider that millions of years in evolution might not be valid, and that this is a prediction by evolution that they should be extinct, therefore they're not extinct. It should just help people to just question it and just to consider the creation model versus the evolution model side by side and see which one holds the data better.
Accounts of ferocious flying creatures have been documented throughout recorded history. Why so many tales of dragons throughout history and cutting across virtually every culture on Earth? Could it be these dragons were actually pterosaurs or pterodactyls? Well, if reports from eyewitnesses are true and living pterosaurs do exist, the finding would refute an almost universally agreed upon geological timetable and even challenge the theory of evolution. In other words, irrefutable proof would seriously meddle with the established order. And we can't have that, can we? Now, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Get in touch through the website, theconspiracyshow.com. And in the meantime, don't be afraid.